All right. Thank you all. Welcome to our Bible class. Thank you for staying and happy to have y'all. We're going to continue in our study of the Ten Commandments, the Decalogue, 10 words. Today we're doing Do Not Steal. Here's our agenda. We've made it thus far, and I really hope that this class has been edifying for you guys, just for personal growth and sort of back to fundamentals, but not even really. Interesting component of this class is the depth you can go. But we are doing Do Not Steal, and we'll finish out in the next two classes with the final commandments here. I did want to kind of revisit the significance of the Ten Commandments to just talk about why this study is important to begin with. When we first started, I posted these verses here. We said to know who God is and what His children ought to be. We've kind of hit this point home, but God is introducing Himself to His children and forming this covenant with them. We read in Proverbs 14, verse 12, it says, "There is a way which seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death." And I think about this verse in the context of the world, and that we talked briefly about how the world has its own set of morals and laws. But are they God's laws? No, they're not. And if you were at the beginning of your faith's journey and you were looking to seek God, or maybe you're in the middle or at the end of your faith's journey and you've been a Christian quite some time, it's good to reorient yourself back to the original design of who a child of God is. I think one of the comments that was made in a former class was, hey, keep in mind, and this is good context, this was actual physical laws that were given to the Israelites. You know, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal. But they're also their spiritual laws. It's a covenant. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 3 through 6, it says, God says, "If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my own possession among all the peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." And so these 10 commandments are going to set His people apart from the entire world. And that's why it's so important to come back and study these things. And if we get out of this study just a reminder of what the Ten Commandments are, then we failed. We all know what thou shalt not murder is, or thou shalt not steal, or thou shalt not commit adultery. But that's just like the thin crust of the surface of the depth of what's happening here, and that's what Jesus reveals to us. But even more so, we talk about the world. I used to think like the world was, secular world was just without God, or without godly morals, or without any morals. And then I started really, as I was studying this, and really just observing, the news cycle and the state of the world, realizing that it's better to realize that we're facing true religious zealots in the world that are zealous for a false gospel, and it's all around us. And that's why it's even more paramount and important to go back to the basics. These people that say they don't go to church or don't believe in God, they're not without religion. They certainly are with religion. And many of them are demanding that we follow after their gods, whatever it may be. You don't think that the LGBTQ movement is a religious movement? It's every bit a religious movement, and it's every bit a false gospel too. Everything they're preaching, and what's interesting, it's gone from this is just something we do to now you do it and you approve it and you endorse it. You're with it. You're with our cause. False gospel. And so I always thought of false gospel as like maybe another form of Christianity that interpreted the Bible incorrectly. And it's almost, if we're going to be truly cunning and wise with the devil, to realize that it's far more almost indiscernible into the crevices of society than we realize. Hence the importance of this. And so I want to just jump right in and read out of Mark chapter 7, verse 21 through 22, and let's have a discussion. The verse reads, "For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed the evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adultery, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. I want to take a moment, or would ask you to take a moment, and if you'd like to discuss with your neighbor or think to yourself, how are these evil things related in this verse? Do they belong together in the same list, and if so, how? And how does the world view these things? So just take a moment, maybe chat with your neighbor a second, and then we'll pass the mic around and have this discussion. How are these items related? It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Here's some good conversations going on here. Let's get my mic passers and let's discuss this for a moment. I think we recognize some of the items in this list here in the New Testament in the book of Mark out of the 10 Commandments. Let's talk for a moment about how are these evil things related? Do they belong in the same list together, and how? And would the world see it that way? Any comments on these questions?
Well, I can't find my passage, and when you memorize verses, you might want to try memorizing the verse citation. But at any event, the Apostle Paul is talking about the things of righteousness for which does no harm. He's talking about how love does good, and when we violate the law of love, we do harm. So in this instance, we see here where we're doing harm to others at each one of these things that he mentions here, and it's a violation of loving our neighbor and loving God. And that's the ultimate personification of evil, if you will.
The antithesis of love. John?
I think there's something interesting about this, and maybe building off what Brian said, there's a victim to all of these acts. And you say, well, how is there a victim to evil thoughts or sensuality? But I think maybe that's at the core of it is, even if you just hold it within your heart, you're creating a victim. You're hurting someone else for yourself.
Yeah, I think that last little bit there is like the summation of what you said. You're hurting someone for yourself. So there's a selfishness embedded in that. Because while there's a victim on one end, there's an equal and opposite entity on the other who's standing in opposition to that victim, who's benefiting in some way, although short term. Ian?
All of these things listed here show a lack, one are selfish, all selfish acts, but they also show a lack of self-discipline. This is all clear examples of a human's physical desires, our bodies taking control of our mind and allowing us to do these things. So lack of self-discipline. So yeah, I do think they are all related, and that at the core, they're all selfish acts that display a lack of self-discipline.
Discipline, I like that word. I'm actually going to use that word here in a second. That's at the core of what it means to be a Christian, and maybe even initially, is self-discipline and restraint. We see this list, and I would submit that the world wouldn't put these things in the same list. I think we talked in former class, you may hear, obviously, I think every country in the world has a law against murder. They say, okay, murder. But sensuality, which in my opinion is celebrated in our culture and encouraged. Envy, they say envy may be looked upon poorly even by someone who doesn't believe in God, but next to murder? And so what I'm driving at here is, I talked about the surface level of the thou shalt nots. If we stay there, we miss the deeper implications of what Christ, what God, what the Word, and what the Spirit is leading your heart towards to reorient yourself to God and to heaven or to Eden, to this perfect creation that He made. He's saying, if you are going to be my child, you're going to look like this from the deepest part of your core. Dad, did you lose it? You still got it.
Yeah, I found my passage here. It's Romans chapter 13, beginning at verse 8. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. For this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. If there's any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Love, therefore, is the fulfillment of the law. And to follow up on what you just said, if you look at Matthew 25 at the judgment scene, those who are condemned are the ones who did not do the loving things, feed, give water, visit those in prison and so forth. Not that the thou shalt nots are not evil, but the evil were condemned for not doing the righteous deeds.
They're connected is the point. We're going to let that be the last comment on this, and we're going to move forward. I promise if you have a comment that fits there, it will fit elsewhere in here as well. I've kind of been building this chart. I built it for the young people's class when we taught this, but it's sort of been evolving. But this idea here is what we've been discussing. There's the physical law. Do not murder. Don't unjustly take the life of someone. Do not commit adultery. Don't cheat on your spouse. Don't stray from God's design. Don't commit these sexual sins. And then what today we're talking about, do not steal. Do not take from others what is unjustly yours. The physical law. But then there's the spiritual heart transformative power of the word. This is what people talk about when they say in loose terms or a macro phrase, Jesus will change your life. And being the why guy or how guy, when I was younger, I said, okay, how or why or where? Give me the substance. This is the substance. How does Jesus change your life? Well, when you drill down, the transformative power of His Word and the Spirit leading you through the Word completely alters the type of person you are and changes your purpose. Now, these two columns here on the right, under spiritual heart, I've kind of toyed with how I call these. At first, I called them, there's the negative and then the positive. The negative is don't insult, don't be angry, and don't even hate, and with regards to murder. And the positive would be to love. And then it occurred to me what's better, I didn't want to create something that was sort of a pejorative, like these are the negative, and it's not just that, it's what you do. It's more so discipline and purpose. A Christian disciplines himself, I think, as Ian said, but then lives with purpose. And that's the deeper, like heart of this. That's the meat. Do not insult, do not be angry, do not even hate, and with regards to murder. And what do we do? How has our purpose changed? John 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, that one lay down his life for his friends. Luke 6, verse 27 says, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you. Stop right there. Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you. We struggle with that significantly. That's the power of the Sermon on the Mount, is Christ exposes the hypocrisy of every living person who's ever lived in the entire world in the history of time. Shows you how important His sacrifice is for us, that we need His grace and mercy. Bless those who curse you. Goodness, we get sort of angry or perturbed from a friend who slights us, didn't text you back or something. Like, everything okay? No, he's saying, do this to your enemies. Pray for those who mistreat you. Whoever hits you on your cheek, offer him the other one also. Whoever takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt from him. This beautiful thing. Same thing with adultery. Don't even long for another. Don't deeply desire, but what's more than that, this is the discipline. You discipline yourself, but then you live with purpose. Submit and protect. Cherish, like Jesus died for the church, with your spouse. This is the life-altering, transformative power of God's words. When people say, let Jesus into your heart, He'll transform your life, this is the rubber hits the road. This is actually where it's changing who you are as a person. And so let's talk about the spiritual implications of thou shalt not steal. Has anyone ever had anything stolen from them before? Raise your hand. Okay, how did it make you feel to have something stolen? Violated. I mean, your house was burglarized, was it not recently? Violated is the word that you most often hear. We had our car window smashed in when we were at the park, and they stole my backpack out of my car, and they were lucky people. They got home, and they had swimming goggles, a brand new set of swimming goggles, and I had a window to replace. But even then, I remember Josie and I saying, ugh, it just feels like a violation. That's right. You had to sit back in that same place that their grubby hands have been in my things that are important to me. So I guess the next question is, does God recognize the value we associate with personal possessions? Now, ultimately, we're going to get into the spiritual purpose that obviously our treasure is where. And that's where the transformative power of the word leads you with proper perspective to know what our physical possessions should mean to us. However, God absolutely recognizes the value we have in personal possessions. There's a whole bunch of verses in the Old Testament. This is Exodus chapter 22, which is 2 chapters after the initial delivery of the Ten Commandments. Verse 7, if a friend, this is a paraphrase, not a quote of the verse. If a friend gives you something to take care of while they're away, you must take care of it as if it was your own. That's how important it is. Somebody gives you an item, they give you their livestock or something to take care of it, you take care of it as if you're your own. And then there's bylaws to that where if you were to lose it or if it becomes damaged, then you're liable. God recognizes the value of the things we have in life. Exodus 22:14, if you damage something you borrowed, you must make restitution. He recognized that there was a need for these laws and sort of spelled out every little bylaw there. Deuteronomy verse 22, if you find your neighbor's animal wandering, you must return it or take care of it until the owner reclaims it. Exodus chapter 23, verse 4 through 5, if your enemy's animal is caught under a burden, you must release and return it, your enemy's animal. I found this interesting kind of going through this exercise of looking through the subsequent laws. What did we say there was, like 630 subsequent laws? I get that number mixed up with captivity, which was 430. Nonetheless, 600 some odd laws in addition to the 10. And we always think about Jesus coming and revealing the true meaning behind these things, and he did. He exemplified it in the way that he lived and the words that he spoke. But the Israelites were not without direction. It wasn't just the 10 Commandments and then you're off. They had the direction. They had the prophets too who were warning them along the way about how they were straying from the heart of the message. But nonetheless, this exemplifies some of the examples of how God values these things. So the golden rule encompasses property as well as personal relations. We need to treat other people with respect, and that extends to their personal belongings, as if they're our own, by the way. Love your neighbor and enemy by caring for their property as you would have them care for yours. Okay, so do not steal. Exodus 20, verse 15. That's the verse. Thou shalt not steal. Let me ask you guys, what are some of the myriad ways this commandment would have applied in the ancient world? Not so different than today, but let me ask about this. At the time of the Israelites moving into the land, the promised land, what are some of the ways this commandment would have applied? I'll give you the first one because it's sort of an easy question, and the obvious answer is just simply theft and robbery, to steal something. Unlawful taking of the personal property of a person or business. There's bylaws in the Word that talk about personal property, your livestock, your property line, your inheritance. I was reading some stories about evidence of, they would live in like mud brick homes, and men how do you break into a mud brick home? You go to the back of it and you dig a hole in the back of the house and get in and take all their stuff. Think about the way the world was maybe before the flood. These are very ancient times, okay? What else? What are some of the other ways this commandment might have applied? I'm interested that you got that one. That is people say things out of order in the ones that I have. That's the first one. And in fact, one of the first examples of thou shalt not steal when it goes into greater depth in the subsequent chapters is the unlawful taking of people. Exodus 21:16, whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him shall be put to death. And so, if you're poor or broke or without property or destitute at this time, it's highly likely you'd be subject to something like this in an evil pagan world. Stolen out, pulled from your family, and sold into slavery as a servant. And one of the first examples is against this specific thing. Ian?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, actually. Think about where they come from. They come from bondage, come from a society where, in Egypt, where they just said, hey, you're a slave now. You're going to do what we say. I mean, they come from a society where this is normal. Like, this is what's socially acceptable. Just like that long list of things that you had up earlier, all those things are socially acceptable now. But we don't do them. We have to have the discipline to not do them, and we have to know that they're wrong because God said they're wrong.
Right. Yeah, sort of address every little thing you could think of through Deuteronomy and Leviticus regarding this subject, and this one was certainly applicative. The other one I had was weights and measurements. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry I stole that one from you. But yeah. So yeah, I stole it from you, man. I stole your glory. Using cheat scales or false weights. We do that today in different ways. People do that. But it was very popular there. You go and you buy some spice. They would trick the scales or trick the weights so that they get more out of it than they deserve, is the idea. Another one, excessive interest, or what we don't use this word very often, but usury. Okay, here's my question for y'all. I read this, I felt this was interesting. What Roman law capped interest at a certain rate? What do y'all think it was? You're close. Oh, this was funny. I'm not going to make anybody raise their hands. If you have a credit card right now that charges you in the 20%, it's possible that's worthy of death according to Ezekiel in the old law. The Roman law actually capped it at 12%. 12% was the cap. It may have changed. The one I read was 12%. It may have been 10% at one time. Terry.
Well, going back to, since you say change subjects, no, actually going back to weights and measures, directly involved with that is I was in the industrial division at the lighthouse, and we always have to struggle with, okay, when the filling machine does not fill the bottles correctly, they would be too light, if not too heavy, definitely too light. And we always have to constantly monitor the weights of these bottles as they go through the filler and go to the next station, such as capping, and even afterward. And so I would have to shout out, low bottles, there's not enough in these bottles. And usually somebody would be watching how they're filled, along with not only the capping, but the sealing, since we also tamper-proof those bottles at the time we were working.
That's good. Yeah, honesty is important. It's important to have what you know you're buying for, that it's a fair transaction. Another couple things that I saw, you couldn't even take a millstone as a pledge because you would deprive a man of his ability to grind bread and eat. You couldn't take a cloak as a promise to repay debt, otherwise they wouldn't have something to keep them warm at night. And so God protected his people, and he told them how they should behave. And there's a way in which your heart should be to adhere to these commands. But today is no different. We have accounting scandals. As a employee of the Treasury Department, we're no short on accounting scandals where I'm from. Embezzlement, swindling, or taking advantage of the poor. That's a big one. In fact, this actually going to be the next couple slides is talking about that exact point. Who tends to suffer the most from the consequences of theft? Yeah, I thought about phrasing that question this way because you can have a lot in this world and you can lose a lot. You can be defrauded out of a significant estate. But I'll say true suffering when you're worried about eating and when you're worried about the bottom layer foundational Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's going to be the poor that are suffering. In fact, we see this in the Old Testament. Before what the prophets are warning the Israelites before Babylonian captivity, we see this in their warning. He's not coming to talk about, I put pickpocketers up there. Is pickpocketing wrong? Yes. It's addressed in some way. I don't know the exact verse. I'm sure that is in some way. Any sort of theft or stealing is wrong. But when God starts to do the I'm going to flip the board move and I'm sick of you guys, he starts to talk about the systemic problems in their culture and how they treated the poor and how there was cultural rot to such a degree that the wealthy abused those who were in need to such a disgusting degree it was worthy of being disenfranchised of Jerusalem and sent into captivity. But we have all these things today, is my point on this slide. So pre-Babylonian captivity, warning and rebuke. I thought some of these verses were interesting. In Amos, he lived in the 8th century during the divided kingdom with King Uzziah and Jeroboam II in Israel. He says, "This is what the Lord says, for 3 sins of Israel, even for 4, I will not relent. They sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They trample on the heads of the poor, on the dust of the ground, and deny justice to the oppressed." So this idea of they sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. You're so poor that you would give up your freedom for just the basic necessity of sandals, which is like a theft. Do we have a comment over here?
Getting back up on your weights and measures, throwing it into a modern situation. It may seem kind of silly, but think about it. Go to the grocery store. You're buying some grapes. Eat about 6 while you're roaming around the store getting other stuff. Is that theft? Are you taking away from the poundage or whatever that you would rightfully pay for?
Unequivocally, yes. Yeah, I thought of a funnier example. I am all about fair trade. I just want someone to tell me the price of something, and then I will decide if that price is warranted, like a latte or a coffee. I want to pay that, or a cupcake perhaps, an overpriced cupcake in Midtown, $4.50. I'll buy a couple of them, and then they flip the iPad around, and it defaults to 22% tip. Theft. Don't you dare. See how our society has changed so disgustingly? That's a heated debate nowadays anyway, and I'm a boomer on that opinion. Micah, woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light they carry it out because it is in their power to do it. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud people of their homes. They rob them of their inheritance. Ezekiel, he oppresses the poor and needy. He commits robbery. He does not return what he took in pledge. He looks to the idols. He does detestable things. He lends at interest and takes profit. This is before their captivity. And that's what I kind of meant by, yes, Jesus was the manifestation of the love of God. He was the perfect representation of what it meant to be an image bearer of God, as he was God. But the prophets warned the people. I don't want to take that away. The Israelites, it's not like they were without instruction, that they couldn't have known that the transformative power of the ark, of the 10 Commandments which resided in the ark. They knew, and they were warned. One interesting tidbit was whenever they returned from Babylonian captivity and Ezra read from the law and Nehemiah helped rebuild the walls to Jerusalem and they celebrated at the temple building, one of the things it points out, it says, "This is a holy day to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep," because they were weeping at the sight of, the reading of the word. It says that. "For all the people were weeping when they heard the words of the law. Then he said to them, go eat of the fat, drink of the sweet, and send portions to him who has nothing prepared. For this day is holy to our Lord. Do not be grieved, for the joy of the Lord is your strength." So I ask, rhetorically, I think, what does this have to do with the 8th commandment? And there's that heart shift. What did they immediately do? They read from the law. They rebuilt the temple. They started offering sacrifices. And then instead of these verses here that describe the detestable things happening, the usury and the abuse of the poor, here they're back, and what are they doing? We're going to feast. We're going to share with each other. And we're all going to be children of God together. You're not going to go without. You're not going to go without. We're going to share amongst each other. Coincidentally, when the church was established, they did the exact same thing. All things in common. That's right. That's hard. This is hard for us to digest. I think there's some, there's just some very deep philosophical things that are going on here about what is, there's like a personal commitment and then there's like our commitment. And so let's talk about a few of these things as we wrap up the last couple minutes of class. I have some New Testament verses. And let's talk about what do these verses reveal about the character of an image bearer of God. The first one is in Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount. You can turn there if you'd like. It reads, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evil person. But whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, let him have your coat also. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2, and give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you. What does these verses reveal about the image bearer of God, we his people? Mike?
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking about this all the way back since you were talking about envy before, being listed next to murder. And, when we talk about the things that are in, multiple times in the Bible, the lists of, sins and all of that, about some that are maybe less shocking than something like murder would
Right.
be. I think it's so important to think about, for us, the influence that we have. I mean, one of our major jobs as Christians, bearing the name of Christ in the name Christian, is to maintain a reputation that is going to encourage people to say, I want to be a part of what's going on there.
Yeah.
And we've spent a lot of time talking about just inherently why theft is bad, but it also tarnishes the reputation of the person that is thieving or envious or whatever those other things may be. And I think the damage to the reputation of yourself, and then by association, the damage to the reputation of the church, is just as harmful as the deed itself.
Sure. Absolutely. Great point. Brian?
What I see here is a parallel between evil and righteousness. And I'll answer your question in this way. God is light, and we are children of light. Therefore, we are to walk in the light, which is to perform deeds of righteousness. Those who walk in the darkness are performing deeds of sin and evil. It's a twofer. When you are performing acts of righteousness, that is, not taking a coat from somebody, but giving them your coat, it's a twofer. You're doing a deed of righteousness. You're walking in light. Therefore, by definition, you are not walking in darkness. When you are sinning and slapping somebody or taking their coat from them, not only are you performing the deeds of thou shalt not, you're wasting time because you're not doing the righteous deeds. It's a beautiful parallel, a metaphor that God puts together. There is no countenance between light and dark. Where there's light, there is no darkness. Where there's darkness, there is no light. Stay in the light and do the deeds of righteousness. When you do the deeds of righteousness, by definition, you are not doing the dark deeds. And when you're doing the dark deeds, by definition, you are not walking in love and in light and doing the right things. And there you see the parallel here of those who do wrong, and you respond by doing right.
I like how you put you're wasting time. That's why this is every bit a fundamental course and then a graduate level course. Not that we're delivering it in a graduate level manner, but the depth of your personal study into this material is the meat and both the milk. Milk me, like college student, would look at the Bible like a list of prohibitions or things that I can't do, as if the Bible and the Word of God were keeping me from a life that, what it meant to be a Christian was not to do certain things. To me, that's like milk. But it's not a bad thing, because discipline is what it means to be a human. But then the growth is, no, I'm not going to miss out on the opportunity, because I think that's where so many people, the depression we have today is predicated in this lack of purpose. And God is telling you, no, you're my child, you're my image bearer, you have a purpose. So when you do these things, you're missing the opportunity of what you can be doing. I saw Ian's hand, and then we'll come over here.
Yeah, just was going to say what this verse says to me about the character, being an image bearer of God is not, we're not here to take, we're here to give. We're here to be a servant to all people, whether it's our enemy or our brothers and sisters in Christ. We're here to serve others in the same way that Christ has served us, laying down everything for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to mimic that image in everything that we do. Be a servant first, not a taker.
I love that. We'll do one more comment, we'll move on to the next.
This is all well and good, except when it involves me. Okay? About 30 years ago, I had a guy sue a board I was on, plus us individually. And your first reaction is, as the human reaction goes, how dare him? What, you know, and he becomes your enemy real quick. But what this does is it gives you individually, when it is you that's being involved, the ability to grow, the ability to pray for him. That was tough to do right up at the front, but a year into the lawsuit, that got a whole lot easier because it was something I was used to doing. So, like I said, this is easy to pontificate upon, except when it affects you, but that's really when you got to dig in and start putting your money where your mouth is what it boils down to. And that's tough to do for us as individuals sometimes.
Yeah, and this is a tough verse, by the way. This is a really, really tough verse, and it's been misinterpreted and misimplied, probably by me and all of us in some manner. How far do you go? It just seems so much, doesn't it? That seems like a lot. And then you see Jesus, who died for people who hated him. And then we hear about our political opponents in D.C., and we're saying, I'll celebrate the day they die. It's strange because, isn't it? I guess I'm making a confession. But that's the point, is how the depth of this, that's the meat, in my opinion. This idea of whoever slaps you on your right cheek, what were they told to do? It was like custom to greet with the holy kiss. And so this idea is instead of a kiss, you got a slap in the face. And the whole turn the other cheek thing is not so that you get slapped again. It's not weakness. That's where I think it's been misinterpreted, is they say, like you're sort of spineless, without conviction. This idea of a Christian just being such a I don't know, no conviction and no foundation. You can be strong and you can be assertive. You can be Ezekiel. You can be Nehemiah and still turn the other cheek, because the idea is you turn the other cheek to give them another opportunity to give you the kiss. You're giving them that opportunity of forgiveness. You slapped me. I still have a door to you for us to reconcile, is the idea. That's a Christian. To even your enemy, I still want to reconcile to you, because the idea of you don't turn the other cheek and back away, the relationship is severed. You have no opportunity with that person. So this is the transformative power there. Let me move on to this one, and then we'll get the comment. So 1 Thessalonians 4 and then 3. Excel still more, and make it your ambition to lead a quiet life and attend your own business and work with your hands, just as we commanded you, so that you will behave properly towards outsiders and not be in any need. For even when we were with you, this is in 2 Thessalonians 3, we used to give you this order: if anyone is not willing to work, then he is not to eat either. For we hear that some among you are leading an undisciplined life, doing no work at all, but acting like busybodies. So how might this one reflect on thou shalt not steal, or the character of the image bearer of God? Right on.
I would just like to point out that we're focusing a lot about ourselves and what we're doing. Instead, I think as an image bearer of God, we need to think about how our actions affect the person receiving what we're giving them. And I have two wonderful examples in my own life that still stick with me today. When I was 15, we were living in an apartment with no electricity, by oil lamp, and no food. And the vice principal knew, and he brought a deer that he had slaughtered and brought us meat to eat. And that was 25, 30 years ago. And I still remember that was just extra for him. But for me at that time, I thought it was everything to have something to eat. And secondly, spiritually, when I decided to obey the gospel, I was still living at home. And I had a family who offered me their home when my mom said I couldn't live with her anymore if I obeyed. And that family means everything to me because of what they have given me and what I can now give my daughter. And I think all of these verses are, at the end of the day, to give those things to those people who don't know what it means to be a child of God.
Yeah. like some seemingly insignificant thing that they did affected your life forever. We did that at we had a men's breakfast, and we talked about that, and we hovered onto the conversation of things people have done in our lives that helped us on our path in our faith. And the stories were just these like minuscule events. Someone walked in the room and said, missed you at church on Sunday. Or maybe it was more of a rebuke, why weren't you at church on Sunday? And this person remembers those words for the rest of their life. It was like the catalyst for them to self-reflect. Or this offering here of helping people when they're in need. To me, that's the antithesis of theft and stealing, is this heart of helping others and being there for others and having a mind towards giving of what you have. I'll just make this point real quickly. I did hear the first bell. Paul's saying here to work so that you won't be a burden on other people. If you have the ability to work, do work. Don't be busybodies. This was one that was interesting to me. There's a lot of people nowadays who sit around and maybe they have an idea that it's okay to be dependent on the government or dependent on somebody else, but they have the ability to work, but then they don't. Here in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, it says, "He who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with one who has need." That is fascinating. And that's to your point, Christy. Why work? What's the transformative purpose of work? I work because I'm told to and I have to. No, not really. You've been given skill sets and you've been given talents and you use those, and God's given you your health and your ability. And then what do you do with those gifts? You work with this desire to share with those who are in need. And not all of us are at the same level sometimes. Some of us are in need, and then later on, hopefully, we can aspire to be that help for people. Is it too late? Sorry.
Time permits, with what Mike was saying earlier and Sister Tom was talking about, the return on investment to go the business side is of not stealing. You think of the example to the young. So my children, I wasn't walking in the market going, I chose not to seek after that woman, or I chose not to kill that person. Those opportunities don't necessarily come, but this one here, don't steal, has so much opportunity, because even the young can see going, hey, they left the corral open, we could go get the farm animal, or hey, they left paper, their wallet dropped out, we could pick it up. And so I'm not ranking these commandments in any way, but this is such a commandment that allows so much teaching and so much learning that not only will we benefit from not doing it, but we have the opportunity to teach so many within our immediate family as well as within this world, for when they see we refrain and then we take it to the next level and turn the other cheek or give of the cloak. So in talking about this commandment, that struck me during the class that there is this is the most, at the present moment, this is the one that's most seen and most opportunity to yield more than just development and growth in me.
True. And they're all that way. I guess we made the point at the beginning with Brian's initial comment. They're all predicated in love and selflessness. That's what you're transformed into. When you die to the world, there's way more gravity in that to me now after studying this death to the world in the physical realm, after studying this material. Because then you live with an entirely different purpose that is spiritual. And you look at physical possessions and things differently. We're going to let that be the last comment because that was the second bell. And that's perfect. I think we covered what I wanted to cover. Thank you all.